gets to Parliament.
For more about 702,
go to primemediaplus.com.
All right, so with less than a year since taking up membership and rising on to become the MKP Secretary General, Floyd Shivambu has now been redeployed to Parliament. The party made the announcement yesterday afternoon, explaining that part of the reason that this decision was taken is that controversial trip he took during the Easter period to Malawi to visit the fugitive Shepherd Bushiri. Mind you, this is an argument that he had been saying, a trip rather, he's been defending, saying that it was on the party's part of the party's program, suggesting that it was sanctioned. But one would ask, if that was the case, then why is he being sent to Parliament? And if that is also the case, why is it that everyone is reading it as a demotion? To try and get a better understanding of this, I'm joined on the line by Lukhona Mnguni, a political analyst. Lukhona, good morning. Welcome to Radio 702. They want to say it's strategic, the decision for Floyd Shivambu to go to Parliament. But if you look at the general consensus, the general take and understanding of it, people aren't seeing it as strategic. Generally, people are seeing it as a demotion. Your initial reading at the news of his redeployment?
Well, good morning, Tshidi, and good morning to your listeners as well. I suppose, this is another, occurrence of musical chairs within the MK party that has come to characterize the party, and I suppose part of it is just an extension of how we used to see musical chairs in cabinet reshuffles under the leadership of President Jacob Zuma then, and I think now this is nothing new. But Tshidi, you'll remember that besides the trip to Malawi, even within the rank and file of MKP, there have been sort of, some murmurs within the party of dissatisfaction with, the conduct and leadership of Floyd Shivambu as Secretary General. Even the clash that became a bit public with Duduzile Zuma Sambula, which of course she had to apologize for. The point really is that the trip may have proven to be an opportune moment to make the necessary changes with a justifiable act within the party. That's one. But I do think that whether the motive is really strategic or not, there will be an extension of the decision that becomes beneficial to MK party. You'll remember, Tshidi, that a lot of people have been complaining in the general public, in fact, that MK party has really been a weak official opposition. It has been overshadowed by a number of, developments and one of those is that even during the budget processes that have taken place, there hasn't been visibility of MK party in the public discourse. And you'll remember that Floyd Shivambu used to be the star debater for the EFF in Parliament, almost his input overshadowing that of Julius Malema during State of the Nation address and various important debates in the National Assembly. I do think that in that respect, if Floyd takes that kind of posture of reintroducing himself as the content-filled person for MK party, it will strengthen the parliamentary bench. In fact, I had actually said this sometime earlier this year to say, I think Floyd is wasted outside of Parliament, where MKP is really struggling. Of course, this also coincides with the judgment around, the former judge, Dr. John Kloppe, in terms of his eligibility to serve in the JSC. And therefore, I think MK party, of course, now might be rethinking its posture in Parliament, new Chief Whip in Colin Makubela and so on. So maybe this is really, whether they are thinking about it as strategic as that, how the general public responds is neither here nor there, to be quite frank, Tshidi. Whether people see it as a demotion or they don't see it as strategic, that's just feelings of ordinary people. But the question is whether or not, in terms of outcome, what we will gauge down the line is a much stronger caucus for MKP, and is a much, and of course MKP, as you know, they now have vacancies that they can now fill in this month of June that they couldn't fill for some time, and therefore it will be interesting to see who else joins Floyd Shivambu in terms of deployment to that caucus, in terms of strengthening up. I have no doubt that you can't have a caucus as big as that one. It's the official opposition against the GNU, but it's not punching in a weighty manner that society actually feels that they are doing the work in parliament.
There's lots of question marks about who else will join, but what kind of reception do you think awaits him in that caucus? Because as you've rightly flagged, that there was this back and forth between him and Tutuzile Zuma, and it found its way in the public domain. She's part of that caucus. There's issues. I don't know if you remember, there was a clash supposedly behind the scenes between Clement Manyathela and Hlophe over a speech that apparently Floyd Shivambu insisted that Hlophe read. So they already have this bad blood of a sense, from my understanding, between the leader of parliament, the deputy president of the MKP, and Floyd Shivambu. So what kind of reception do you think he'll receive from the party?
Well, look, I think, he was the Secretary General, and as the Secretary General, you generally maintain a good rapport, particularly with your caucus in the National Assembly and, of course, various legislatures. So it's not like there's bad blood in the sense that they can't work together, but also I can't put it past MKP to say that down the line we might see Shivambu becoming the caucus leader, and it may well be that the former judge feels the parliamentary work is really strenuous to people who are not naturally instinctive politicians. It may well be that the judge is looking at some form of departure from parliament. It's possible, and he contributes to the party, but it allows himself some space to do other things, business ventures and so on and so forth, because it's quite clear that he's going to be constrained by virtue of having been impeached. He's going to be constrained in terms of how great and the extent of the role he can play as caucus leader. So I don't put it past MK seeing Floyd as a future caucus leader there in Parliament with Colin as chief whip. That is, of course, really possible. So I'm saying, whilst, of course, some people might, view him in a particular way, there would have been those tensions. But by nature, politics are a tension field. It's how you navigate the tension that really determines whether a party falls or stands.
Before I move on from Parliament, I've got to ask you about what it would be like for Floyd having to face off with the EFF in Parliament. You, I think, correctly said there, he used to be one of the stars of the EFF. I think the EFF has kind of struggled a little bit to figure itself out beyond what Mbuyiseni Ndlozi and Floyd Shivambu used to be in Parliament. You've seen the rise of the likes of Sinawa Tambo and Sihle Lonzi. But now, when you see them facing off, the EFF has done a remarkable job over the past few months of trying to focus on particular issues. Do you see them derailing, him getting a core of their attention to one up of Floyd Shivambu, who will be in the same room as them? Do you see that being a distraction in any way?
Well, I got into trouble when I spoke to you about 11 months ago.
Yes.
Because I said that MK party poses an existential threat for the EFF. And I think Floyd going back to Parliament will pose some limbo for the EFF because there are people who literally just wished and hoped to listen to Floyd Shivambu. He is like I said, he's a content-filled person. He's an intellectual in his own right, a scholar in his own right, and I think he will contribute to the debates of Parliament quite seriously. I think for the EFF, of course, the unspoken thing in Parliament is really the place of the Progressive Caucus and whether or not officially they need to dissolve the Progressive Caucus, particularly having seen what ATM did in terms of issuing a statement about next year and their conversations with MK Party. So the Progressive Caucus really seems to now be MK Party and others versus the EFF, and the EFF has to probably make some political decisions for its own survival and its own future to insulate itself as a party from the dominance or imposition of MK Party. But I do think that in Parliament particularly, they will have to think carefully how they continue to determine and drive issues. EFF has a good history of issue driving, and Floyd will probably assist MK Party with that kind of contribution.
Going back now to the party itself, just before I spoke to you, I think the last hour, I spoke to Patrick Sindani. I know you would know him. He ultimately followed Floyd Shivambu. Yes, he did so via the PA from the EFF to the MKP. And he said what he found difficult, he resigned yesterday from MKP with immediate effect. And he found it difficult navigating the MKP because everywhere you went, you'd be told you're from the EFF. Go back to the EFF. You're trying to impose the EFF. The feeling that one gets is that there's a constant resistance to even the idea of fusing new people. I mean, Sindani's argument is the MKP must take itself seriously enough to want to engage even those who have history, who come with baggage and history in the political landscape, that you can't isolate them and want to set them aside because of where they come from. You can't resist them to that extent. Yet, he says that was the experience. He believes that's what led to this movement around Floyd Shivambu.
Well, look, I mean, every organization suffers the proverbial founders syndrome. And there will always be people who feel that, you know, the more there are newcomers, the higher the possibility of them being threatened. Because remember, politics is about upward mobility. Everybody wants at some point a future where they imagine themselves taking over the reins of leadership once the layer of founding leaders dissipates and all of that. So the point I'm making really is to say it may well be that there are people who find those who come from the EFF a serious threat, because remember, they come with a massive base of understanding organization, politics, and maybe they also come with constituencies in some instances. But of course, they also threaten them because some may feel they're jumping the line and all of that. But those are the tendencies of new parties until those parties have settled into some kind of political culture, organizational culture. And of course, you begin to democratize those parties and they get to go to conferences and, you know, the structures are elected, they've got a mandate from people and so on. And I think that, if you're then in a party that has a lot of uncertainty about those kind of processes, it's not clear when they'll go to conference. It's not clear when they'll formalize structures to ensure that they are built to get a mandate from members and so on. And of course, MK Party, in my view, has built itself into a super electoral machine. So it's a power. It's a power pursuit machinery, and therefore its internal logic is about how do you make sure that we are nimble enough as an organization to amass as many votes in every election that we contest, rather than how do we organize ourselves properly as an organization. And I have no doubt that at some point it's going to create massive frustration, including even for those who are founders, for those who are joining from other parties, because some of those people come from that culture and tradition of constant internal democratic elections. Whatever its factionalism and its faults of vote buying and vote rigging and so on, the ANC sort of talks about it in the context of continuous attempts to hold internal democracy and make internal democracy viable. And I think people who come from that tradition and culture will eventually get frustrated when they don't see any end in sight of, some conference of sorts and some development of internal democracy and so on.
All right. Lukhona, there's some voice notes that I want you to be able to hear and to weigh in on. But before that, let's take a quick break and then we'll come back to those WhatsApps.
Let's walk the talk.
702.
Right, so we're in conversation with political analyst Lukhona Mnguni, trying to make sense of the decision coming out of the MKP yesterday. Floyd Shivambu, no longer Secretary General. I think we are now waiting for the 6th Secretary General to be appointed. If not, I think the 6th. I think it was the 5th to be appointed. Lots of names already doing the rounds with close proximity to former President Jacob Zuma being punted as those who will replace Floyd Shivambu. But we're trying to make sense of what does this mean for Shivambu's future and the organization. Some of you have sent questions and WhatsApps to Lukhona, so I'm going to play you a little bit of those. Lukhona, please just take a listen and then you can comment on what the listeners are saying.
Hi, Tshidi. Something that I feel is not being adequately ventilated is the issue of what Floyd was doing in Malawi. Why was he there? He said he was sent there, or at least with the understanding or endorsement of his leadership. They seem to be prepared to punish him for having been there, but nobody has actually interrogated exactly what it is that he was there for, what message he took there, what message he brought back there, and what his exact mandate was, because he did say he was sent by his party, or at least with his party's knowledge there. I don't know what Lukhona thinks. From Pretoria.
Very good morning, Tshidi and Lukhona. Lukhona, you overreading Floyd, man. I don't see Floyd surviving being removed from the post, being demoted. Really, he's going to be a struggle. The guy, you could see him yesterday when he was addressing the media. You could see how disappointed he was. If it was also part of him to go and strategically really try to destabilize or EF or made a serious contribution, the guy was disappointed, Moshere Boy.
Thank you so much, Lukhona. You are over reading Floyd. If you can maybe weigh in on Mushere's WhatsApp, as well as the question mark around the trip to Bushiri.
Well, Tshidi, I think it's interesting to continuously interrogate what the motive of that trip to Malawi would have been, particularly, of course, coming, I'm no longer sure now which one came first between his and Ndlozi's. Of course, Ndlozi's would have upset Bushiri, and of course, Floyd would have gone there. You know that Bushiri has, at least in the South African context, a long relationship with some of the EFF leadership.
Yes.
And EFF leaders. You would remember that Naledi Chirwa, the member of parliament of EFF, even got into trouble for thanking Papa for her making it to parliament. But I'm trying to say that there is a long-standing thing, and there are certain personal ties that you can never know how far deep they go and to what extent people are still in contact for their own personal and private matters, and therefore sometimes they have to perform these public acts to prop up each other and so on. Of course, for the MK party leadership, the whole cloud around Bushiri is still, of course, around how he managed to escape the country, blah blah blah, which could be another extension of politics that have to do with Ramaphosa and so on. I'm not sure that MK party is. I'm not sure that. Ramaphosa is. I'm not sure that MK party is the ultimate chaser of fugitives against justice. To be quite honest, I think it's part of a performative political act that allows them to be in the news and continue to be in the news in that way. But I think the last part. Yes, of course. One may well be overreading matters, and that's the beauty of public discourse, is that we put our opinions, and when we are not clear, we manage to say that. Will Floyd survive within MK party? Where else does he go? And sometimes in politics, you tag it out, as the saying would go, until sometime. There will be a moment in the next 5 to 7 years. Remember also, security of tenure is important. The next big election is really 2029. 2026 local elections will be big, but the next big election is 2029. So if everybody sort of massages each other and target out towards 2029, so much could have changed. And I think the nature of MK party is such that there's a high turnover of issues. And I think people underestimate the importance of parliament in between elections. The spotlight of the media in most instances is actually in parliament. It's not always that party officials who are outside of parliament are able to attract the necessary media attention, the issue driving and so on. And I think our parliament in this 7th administration is extremely contested, and there's going to be a lot of opportune moments to drive issues. MK party has a lot of airtime that is currently going to waste, if we are quite honest.
out of time, but I can't let you go without asking you to weigh in on Zamani Soul and Andile Lungisa, some of the people in the ANC who've really been quite magnanimous in all of this. Yes, Fikile Mbalula ridiculed Floyd Shivambu yesterday, but you got Zamani Soul saying, you laugh at him today, but I see ruthless adversity that is in the process of molding a future leader here. That Floyd dealt yesterday with yesterday's issue with dignity. He carried the burden of the pain of embarrassment and humiliation from the leadership. Just very quickly, what does that tell us?
Well, I mean, it tells you that some people in the ANC are quite sober to the fact that the ANC is a party in decline. The ANC is going to need many more friends in future. And the ANC probably would do well to not demonize its former children and leaders of the party, because down the line, there may be or will be the natural allies at some point, because the results of the GNU will be determined at the polls, and it may no longer be viable to construct a government in the current form in the future to come. And therefore, the likes of Floyd Shivambu in future may be good friends of the ANC.
And that is completely lost on the Secretary General of the ANC. Thank you so much. That's Lukhona Mnguni, a political analyst, giving us his views on developments coming out of the MKP yesterday.